So welcome back. We're here to have a really terrific panel on governance and regulation. If you're looking for leveraging video workflows in DAM, please pop back to the agenda tab and click on track 2. Or for one of our best named sessions, DAM, Meet Commerce, Commerce, please meet DAM. You two need to get to know each other. Please click on track 3. And for this session and for all, please put our expert panelists to the tests and send your questions to the Q&A tab at any time throughout the session. We've allocated some good time for Q&A in our session. And in our session, in order to avoid the nefarious Zoom baton passing, I'm going to have the honor of being the official slide mover forward person. And I'm ready to do that right now to ask Tamir to introduce himself, and then we'll get started. Tamir, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, David, and hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm Timur. I work for Avanade, which is a global consultancy and technology company. And I head up our marketing technology practice globally. My personal focus is very much in the content management and digital asset management space. So I'm delighted to be here and really kick off this talk around regulation and governance, probably with some fairly generic trends that we are seeing with customers of ours, both large and small globally, to set the scene a little bit and talk the impact of regulation and governance going forward in the digital space, and with a focus on content and assets. What we're seeing is a significant increase in the amount of content and the volume of assets that companies and organizations are producing today. The reasons, I suppose, are multifold, and probably starting with a desire to be relevant and to personalize experiences for employees, for clients, customers, stakeholders, and not just on your website, but across different touch points, and probably an increasing number of both physical and digital touch points. So the volume of assets, the volume of content that's being created is significantly growing, partly also because content creators are, I suppose, in a way becoming democratized. So we have user-generated content, increasing number of social platforms, and a growth and a proliferation really of sharing and gig economies. And by virtue of that, this traditional relationship between seller and buyer, between employer and employee, is changing, and content and assets are being created in different areas and by people who maybe previously didn't have to create content. So thank you for moving on, David. My view is we are all becoming content and asset creators in a way. And I just wanted to showcase, a simple, in a way, sort of customer life cycle, or an end-to-end life cycle, when any of us might consider, a purchase, or maybe a donation to charity, or maybe even, going to the theater, or traveling. And traditionally, a lot of content was being created by marketing teams or communication teams. But of course, that's changing with the increase in digitization and also the automation of processes along this whole life cycle. So, the fact that contracts can be created by someone in customer service, or if you have happen to have a maybe small accident with your car and you're taking photos you know, to upload to insurance company's website. You know, all of these pieces of content, all of these assets are really growing and becoming part of what I would see as a much broader content and asset ecosystem. You know, and touch points today are allowing not just one-way interaction. You know, it's not just push to interacting with organizations or companies as part of this process. If you'd like to move on, David, for the last slide. Thank you. So with all of this, I think what's really interesting is that, for me, there are three areas that governance and regulation will play an even bigger part going forward. The first one is around legal questions. And I think what we're seeing is more and more questions being asked by our clients around how they deal with asset ownership, accountability for pieces of content that are being created as part of their web experience and beyond. And these are not just you know, questions around their employees potentially creating content, but you know, if you're you know, if you're working, if you're a company that is in the gig economy, something like Airbnb or, you know, Uber Dash, where you don't have that traditional employer-employee relationship, you know, legal and accountability questions are really interesting. We then go to regulation. My personal opinion is that I see a more and more fragmented, you know, globally fragmented regulatory process, you know, coming in. So you can maybe tell I'm in the UK. We're no longer part of the EU. There's already movements around you know, removing the UK from things like GDPR, and there's also a feeling that the time to become compliant, these compliance cycles, are getting shorter. And of course, a really big part, I think, is around ethics and appropriateness. You know, what type of content and assets are, you know, is appropriate, and how do we deal with, you know, all of these vast numbers of touch points, and a lot of these assets that are being created maybe outside a governance framework, and also localized, you know, different types of regulations. How you know, age, ethnicity, gender, and other you know, criteria need to be applied to you know, govern what we present as part of a good experience. And yeah, I think I don't have an answer for you how you can deal with all of this. I wanted to kind of throw this up as a question. You know, I hope someone maybe will ask some interesting questions later around how we might deal with that. But my colleagues on the panel, I'm sure, will give some examples of how they are dealing with you know, some of these challenges that we're seeing.
Perfect. Thanks so much for setting the larger picture with this. And as you've noticed and seen who's joined us in the panel today, we have a perspective from a world-renowned service organization, an extraordinary network of museums with a mission of purposefulness and engagement around the United Kingdom, and a global perspective on the private sector and these issues. So to start us off in the particulars, Celine, over to you, and if you'd kindly introduce yourself.
Hello, and thank you for having me. So my name is Celine, and I am the Global Digital Asset Manager at Save the Children, and I'm part of the Global Creative Content Unit. And I just wanted to here sort of present the what would be, give you an introduction of the organization and the dam, and also discuss the considerations, the main considerations for organizations such as ourselves, and then how we, what framework we have internally for our governance, for internal governance. So hopefully this will be insightful to some of you. Next slide, please, David. Thank you. So Save the Children is a global organization. It's made up of 30 national members, and it operates in 122 countries. It shares one name, one strategy, and the ambition for all children to survive, learn, and be protected. A little bit about our DAM. So we've had a global digital asset management system since 2018. We bringing together several systems under one single DAM. Therefore, it's still very new. Next slide, please, David. Now, I wanted to touch upon a few of the main considerations for us. The main one is safeguarding, because most of our contributors are children, and therefore we store on the DAM very sensitive personal data, which we have to, take. We have to just be careful how we manage it. The next one is ethics. We have to adhere to ethical practice standards, and that's, I would say, extremely important in our field. And then GDPR, as Timur mentioned, it's very fragmented and it's constantly changing. And being a global organization, we need to be aware of the changes. And he also mentioned the fact, that we're going through Brexit in the UK. And so all of those aspects add to the considerations in how we manage and remain compliant, which leads me to the next bit, which is we need to make sure that we are compliant and that we evolve that our governance evolves with the changes that come about. And the compliance goes through making sure the system access is managed with our security functions and metadata permissions. It also means working very closely with our legal teams and our global data protection officers. And it's also making sure that our DAM software provider is compliant with GDP, and obviously making sure that we have informed consent for all of the content that we create and manage through DAM, which also involves a clear process in withdrawal of consent and so on and so forth. And lastly, obviously being a global organization, I would like to add that, sorry, David, I just forgot to mention the alignment is extremely important to us as well. And one way of working towards alignment is creating a framework in the compliance through DAM. And the framework we have is our global image guidelines. These underpin how we make, gather, use, and manage our images, which also includes videos within our DAM. This allows us to make sure that we all align in how we manage the content. It includes our image retirement policy, which is based on 5 years. This is mostly for ethical reasons. We believe that circumstances change in a child's circumstances will change a lot within 5 years, and therefore we should not use those images for a longer period than that. Obviously, exceptions apply. We also always seek informed consent, making sure that before we involve our contributors in any videography or photography, that they are well and fully informed on how what we will do with that content, how it will be used, and what it will entail, what their contribution will entail, in the sense of they will know exactly what to expect before they're photographed. And then we also have a very clear process around withdrawal of consent. We make it very clear to them, and we encourage them that, we let them know that they can withdraw consent at any point, which means that we make sure that, consent forms, release forms are stored, are traceable, or trackable, and so that assets can be removed if consent is withdrawn, and we can notify users through DAM. The other aspect is safeguarding. As I mentioned previously, we have a very strong safeguarding policy throughout the organization, and this is applied throughout our content gathering, archiving, and distribution. We have a very, shall we say, a very complex vetting system before assets are shared globally. And then finally, we have our ethical practice standards, which are applied in our image processing, content, and context. Obviously, we have to make sure we are compliant with the International Committee of the Red Cross Handbook on Data Protection in Humanitarian Action, which states that children are a particularly vulnerable category of data subjects, and the best interests of the child are paramount in all decisions affecting them. And therefore, whenever we are processing content, we always apply the triangle of risk. And this is for reasons of child safety. We never show all three identifiers: real first name or full name, specific location, image for any individual child in any communications. So, and as mentioned, the ethical practice in manipulation of images, we have to stay truthful to the images and the context that we are showing. And this, I have to say, I wanted to also mention in this here during this talk, is that with the recent events happening in Afghanistan, this has brought forward the challenges that we face around these aspects of GDPR. And as you know, Save the Children has worked in Afghanistan since 1976 and delivering services to children and their families across the country. But due to the current situation, the organization has had to temporarily suspend services. We have a duty of care to those we work with, and we had to act very swiftly to protect children and communities in Afghanistan. We had to remove names. We couldn't just remove names and locations. All children are given pseudonyms to protect them already through the DAM, but we also had to remove all of the content with children's faces and visually identifiable locations. And this was not only through distribution through DAM, but also through public-facing platforms managed by Save the Children. We decided to do this immediately and act quickly. It was a huge undertaking, and it meant that many had to stop their normal work to prioritize going through 841 of our web pages. And we also had to stop the distribution of over 1,000 images and videos on our DAM. And this includes reports and files just to simply protect the children of Afghanistan and the staff. Within 48 hours, the majority had been taken down, and all our members were doing the same. But this really highlights our accountability and the importance to always make sure that we are aware of the risks and we mitigate. Next slide, please, David. So some objectives we hope to achieve by next year. As you can see, it's something that's constantly evolving. We can always do better, but currently we are reviewing the system, and we are especially focusing on taxonomy, metadata structures, as well as user adoption. And we are also undertaking a global content review, speaking to children, staff, experts, partners, and the public. The review is specifically focused on unconscious bias and storytelling, ensuring children are at the heart of our content strategy and are empowered in telling their own stories. We aim to set the NGO sector's gold standard for ethical content gathering, management, and distribution, and the DAM is central to achieving this. Thank you very much.
Celine, thanks so much. And to have the real world experience that embodies, personifies, and challenges the high standard to which you conform so much on the front pages, so to speak. So thank you for your reflections on that.
Thank you.
And next, Paul, over to you. And if you could turn your camera on and quickly introduce yourself and take it away for a few minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Paul Evans. I'm the Historical Projects Officer at the Army Museum's Ogleby Trust. For those of you unfortunate enough to hear my speeches before, I apologise in advance. We are 3.5 years into a major project to digitise 154 regimental collections across the United Kingdom. Why are we doing that? Well, as David's shown on the screen there, AMOT are the advocates for the military museums of the British Army in the UK. So we've got 154 regimental collections and we try to support them in any way that we can. So our project at the moment is live. So what I can say is we've got 62 days to go before it goes live to the rest of the world, and the website will appear and the dams in the background will be absolutely spectacular. He says, fingers crossed, touching wood, etc., etc. Today I can give you a lessons learned, and we can talk about the reality check that this project has brought up. So if I lessons learned, we must clearly articulate intent. That's the only time I'm going to read off one of the slides today. What does that mean? It means we learned very quickly that people think when you go and knock on the door and say, we'd like to digitize all of your collections and put them online for you free of charge, they hear different things. People don't understand or interpret words differently. What does digitization mean? We've gone from dealing with huge museum collections that have got lots of content already, that fully understand cataloging, fully understand metadata. They were on board straight away saying, yep, no problem. Here's the extra collections that we want to do. Let's integrate. Let's get everything onto one site. Let's do the business. No problem at all. All the way up to the old chap who has got a car garage worth of old books from his regiment that he's really proud of, hasn't got a clue what you mean by digitization. Some of them have said, well, do you mean giving us a website? We've got one. So no, that's not what we're talking about. We are, but it's not what we're talking about. And that has caused us challenges throughout. So right now we've got 1.6 million images ready to go with 97 platform collections. And each one of those 97 collections, we've had the conversations with of, please, can we have the metadata? Please, can we have access to your collections? We would like to scan this. We would like to scan that. And trying to get across to people that initially this is going to be an archival database. And when we said digitize the collection, quite a few people misunderstood and were getting old uniforms out, medals, and saying, well, you can photograph this, you can photograph that. We got that wrong. And it's that interpretation that we realized, and we've kept hold of it as much as we can. But as with all networks and 154 military museums, they talk to each other. Gossip is rampant. That's what the internet's all about. We lost control of the messaging there for a little while. So people were saying things about the platform, about the direction of the project that weren't true. And we had to sort of rein them back in with reality check emails saying, no, we're not going to do this. No, we're not going to be doing that. An awful lot of people were worried about control, and we had to start at the very beginning explaining what digitization leading on to intellectual property rights meant, and then about security of content on the platform, and then what privacy meant within the different layers within the museum structures and within those organizations themselves. There were people who didn't want their volunteers to see certain information, safeguarding of donorship, all that kind of good stuff. All of that had to be clearly defined and controlled. And that's where we really got into the sticky mess of reality check, when I suddenly discovered that not 3 or 4 collections didn't know everything that they owned, but 35, 40, 50 collections did not know the ownership status of the material. And in some cases, they've been caring for 80 years. Was it owned? Was it a gift? Was it a loan? Did they purchase it? When it came in, did they sign the right paperwork to take over the intellectual property rights of that material? Lots of people didn't know. So what we've had to do is we've had to reach out to all of the legal areas in the United Kingdom, and I'm afraid this is UK based, so apologies for those of you outside of the environment. We've got something called the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO. We've had constant conversations with them. The National Archives, constant conversations with them from the very beginning to only this afternoon. Welcome to Cheshire, by the way. It's late in the day here, so I've finished work for the day, but only a couple of hours ago I was doing emails again, just checking what the content agreements were between the National Archives and another regimental collection to make sure that we weren't stepping on any toes anywhere. And the biggest point on all of that is so many people wouldn't tell us at the beginning that they didn't know. And that has been a huge problem. Next slide, please, David. There is a great picture of quality content. They are the enlistment books of the Royal Artillery, 1921 to 1946, held at the Army Personnel Centre in Bourne Avenue, Hayes, which was closed over a decade ago. And the Ministry of Defence decided that they no longer wanted them. They didn't need them anymore. They had the information under the systems. And rather than throw them away or pulp them, the decision was made to give them to the regimental collections. So they called together a project team. I was one of the members of the project team, and we distributed them all across all 154 collections, those who wanted them. About 4 collections refused to take theirs, they weren't interested, but the National Army Museum stepped in and took those. I was part of the project team, so I know we produced a document signed by the National Archives, signed by the Keeper of Collections, saying, here is the attestation books, we no longer require them, we are giving them to you as a gift, they are yours to do with as you see fit. So when I joined this project, I pointed all of this out to the guys running the project, and I've been going around different museums saying, you haven't included your attestation books. And in 10 years, people have forgotten, or the handover notes haven't happened, or they hadn't catalogued it properly. So they didn't realize that they were theirs, or they didn't believe me. And there was actually one case of, I was told that they were absolutely on loan and the people couldn't do anything with them because they had a letter signed by Paul Evans. And when I had to point out I was Paul Evans, there was red faces all around. So it's that kind of granular detail that we had to get into even before we've gone anywhere near scanning the documents, linking it to metadata or making up the metadata, producing it either through OCR or through transcription, then loading it onto the platform, and then within the platform, working out the different levels of permissions to be able to go forward to say, right, are we even at a point where we can make this available to the general public? So we sat down at the very beginning and said, wouldn't it be a great idea if we digitize everything, put it into a private silo, and then the collections could take out and make available to the general public those items that they know are clear for the future. And that is what we've spent 3 years doing. And it has been absolute agony. It's been great fun, don't get me wrong, but it has been a wake-up call in project management in a digital environment about a digital project that has great potential for the future. And we've designed the platform that way to say, right, we've put 10 years worth of funding into this. We know it's going to be live for a minimum of 10 years. Wouldn't it be great if we can go on to World War II? Wouldn't it be great if we can go backwards to the Napoleonic Wars? Wouldn't it be great if we can include all those other collections we can't find yet? And we're still looking for them. Only last week did another collection come on board.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I wish we had the hour to go through the ins and outs. And now to complement Celine and Paul, we have a private sector perspective. Stephen, I'm so glad you could join us today and you take us through a different point of view on regulation and governance.
Thank you very much, David and team and audience for joining today. Yeah, quite right. I do have a bit of a private sector view. My name is Stephen Kaufman, and I'm the Vice President of Business Development and Strategy at ESCO Packaging and Color, which also includes the Pantone brand. If you're in the creative space, that might be a familiar brand to you, and the X-Rite brand, which is about color measurement. So a lot of our story, even in DAM, is about color and color accuracy. You can advance to the next slide if you would, David.
You bet.
In my role, I've dealt quite often with pharmaceutical and packaging compliance. ESCO is largely involved in the packaging space, and as consumers, I'm sure everybody in this call deals with packages every day, the information on them. I started out with looking at international boundaries as it relates to governance, and there's a number of cases where data has been subpoenaed by a regulatory authority in one jurisdiction and is trying to reach into other jurisdictions. And often this can relate to the physical, I say physical, it's actually the digital presence in different data centers. So if you imagine, most all of you have heard of Amazon Web Services, AWS. And so if I am a company in the United States and all my data is in the United States and there's a suit filed against me in Europe, the European powers that be would have quite a bit of legal difficulty subpoenaing that data. But if I had it backed up in Europe, let's say I had the data in data center US and I was just backing up in Frankfurt at an AWS data center, the distance to that data is quite short, actually. And so a lot of companies are aware of this and trying to mitigate their own legal risks. And I think it's just a quick vignette of how deep you can get into data privacy and data jurisdiction, and it starts to come down to the physical hosting of a particular computer in a particular market. David, if you'll go to the next slide, I have a list here, and I thought rather than reading them out, there, as you guys are probably in different markets, one or two may apply to each of you. If you're in pharma, maybe quite a few of these will apply to you. But in the US and in the EU in particular, and I think kind of relating back to something we said earlier, these regulations are replicating, and then they're also going to countries that have historically relied on the US and the EU, and now they're creating their own regulations. So I just recently saw in Sudan that they adopt the EU, but they've got their own peculiarities as to how they would enforce ingredients declarations on a consumer products good. Before I get into just a couple of these regs, I want you to just imagine for a minute the layers that are involved in the things that you buy. So something that you see or read could have a particular amount of regulation around it, like pornography would be a good example of regulation around something that you see, or language on a television program, something you hear. And then you get to let's say hair products, things that you put on you, skin creams. Now you're ingesting something through your skin. That can go on through eating, fully consuming a box of cereal. And then when you get into the med device space, you could actually have something implanted in your body for the rest of your life. And so as you go through these gradations of experience with these products, the regulations around them tend to change. And of course, if it's something implanted in a body, they're quite extreme and complex. This real complicated one, the first one, is really about digital signatures and the fact that if somebody signs off on a label for a drug, let's say, and you imagine the difference if you have 10.0 milligrams of a drug versus 1.00, that moving of a decimal place, a few molecules of ink, is a life and death matter. And so in that space, every person that approves or touches or reviews that content or signs off on it or distributes it has to be tracked across time. And we talked, I think the Save the Children example was 5 years. In med device, the regulation is 100 years past the life of the person receiving the implant. So in the most extreme case, we have somebody that took a eye implant. It's like an implanted cornea, and it's a 10-year-old child. So the child could live 90 years and you'd have to go 100 years beyond that. So if you begin to think about archiving something or even be responsible for archiving it for that many years, that quite complex. There is tracking and tracing of materials. Right now, food farm to fork is very popular, and even going down to serializing an individual jar or can or element. David, we can go to the next one there, past life sciences. And then some other areas to think about: sustainability. So now because sustainability is getting a new focus, I would like to say post-COVID, but let's call it late COVID right now, and maybe we can say post-COVID soon enough. But particularly around materials and different governments wanting to lean on consumer products companies to use certain amount of post-consumer content. taxonomies, which were internal. And I think, David, you rightly emphasized the word external, but sometimes taxonomies are externally imposed by us. So for example, a global standard for UPCs is led by a body called the GS1, and they have a taxonomy that needs to intersect with a corporate taxonomy in order to search, sort, and deliver data in the way that the standards body expects it and the way that the retail community expects it. I think we talked a little bit earlier about corporate culture and external forces in culture impacting how we keyword or tag something. If you think of a human being, and we could think of some very appropriate ways to tag the human being so that we could find them in a DAM, you could equally think of many, many completely inappropriate ways that social tagging or individual tagging could be used against an element. And in some cases, a company might be liable if other users are seeing those social tags. And then last but not least, I'll mention branding and licensing. So I have one quite large consumer products company that license images from movies from a entertainment company. And the licensing agreement would be that each time that consumer product company use that example, they'd have a license agreement. Well, in the case of this this customer, they lost the references between the images, the number that was emblazoned, and the actual contracts, and had to pay enormous fines to catch back up with this licensing entity. So, David, I think you've got a few comments or perhaps questions on that. I'll leave that here, and then maybe some of these items would tickle curiosity or questions for the rest of the session.
Yes, while I get back to the holding slide, Stephen, on the, I'm going to pop back one slide here.
Sure.
There's a phrase that's very well known to many of us, and the very bottom of your slide about DAM data versus PIM data.
Sure.
But many of the professionals who join us here are working in a segment that where they have what we might call tombstone data about an object in a museum collection or something like that.
Yes.
What does PIM mean?
A PIM is an acronym for Product Information Management. And so DAM has always been media assets, digital files, and the data related to them. PIM is about products and the data related to them. With the intersection becomes interesting when you start storing product images for e-commerce in a DAM. And the two sciences or disciplines are merging, so that in a DAM, I might want to be able to reach out for any DAM asset and get PIM data. And likewise, the PIM manager, PIM system might want to reach out and grab all the assets related to a product. So the two are rapidly intersecting in e-commerce.
I saw a very fascinating example of this where a manufacturer of reflective thread, so the thread that's used in safety vests, and there's an ISO standard about degree of lumens. So this thread at this light condition can be seen for this distance, and it's PIM data. But if that can travel with the asset itself, with the thread, and then to the clothing manufacturers, it helps to bring a lot of unity and also auditability. Speaking of the thesis of this panel about, well, what do you mean somebody working on a rail line can wear this at sunset or something like that?
That's right.
The great
and
example.
even an ERP system. So if you went to the manufacturer, they'd have an SAP system with the material master code for that thread. And so the tying of the ERP data to the consumer data to the manufacturing data is really the intersection of the problem.
Yeah, and it's true for all of our speakers. And Celine, we had a question come in for you, wondering, do you tie the rights documents to the DAM? Or it rotates around the question that's interesting for everyone about, okay, I get a release of sorts, and maybe it has certain governing conditions. And the question specifically was asking if Save the Children has a rights repository tied into DAM.
So that's a good question. At the moment, we don't have a separate system, rights management system. We just make sure that we have our release forms with the assets, linked to the assets. So that's how we manage them. But it's something that we'd like to look into ways of perhaps making the consent forms easier to do, like automating it, perhaps finding a digital tool to generate them to make it easier. Often some of our contributors, they can't write, so there's different, there's that aspect. The other aspect is just having to scan release forms back into the system. It's just very time consuming for people. So it's something that we would love to look into, is ways of automating that, because as you know, the safeguarding aspect, there's a lot of aspects that we can't automate and we can't go AI way because there's just such a safeguarding risk, or there's that privacy aspect of it. But definitely, yeah, consent forms is something that we could definitely improve on our workflow. So I hope I answered that question.
Well, I would just say, when we see you in London and in New York in person, again, where we raise a glass that's not two-dimensional, you'll be able to tell us what you've done. You have a few months to work on it.
Yeah.
Don't we all hope that? So Tamir, we had a question come in that I think that'd be interesting to get your perspective on. And it's a broad question, so I'll let you quickly be challenged by this. And that is, how often should we hold governance meetings about these issues? And I know there's no one fits all, but it's a great question. I love the question. So
yeah, it is a great question. Obviously, I think there's no one size fits all answer for that. I think it depends on. I think it depends on two things. I think it depends on how regulated the industry is that you're in, and how important overall compliance and regulation is to the assets. But I think it also, the second aspect, and maybe more important, is how much content and how many assets do you produce, and how much change is there in your DAM. For some organizations there may be very little, and maybe governance and sort of compliance meetings could be once a year if you have few products and little change to those products throughout a year, and products have a long life cycle, and others, especially where there's external content, external asset creation, and I'm thinking about Celine here too, where there's an ever evolving, whether it's political or regulatory change occurring, you probably need to meet once a month, if not more.
Yeah, it can sure vary, and it's quite fascinating about that. So
Yeah.
Paul, I'm going to give you a chance to answer a question that came in for you in the 1-minute flashcard style, as we're nearing the point at which the hands of the clock issue a bit of a reminder to us. And the question came in that said, well, Paul, it seems like you're very close to either records management, privacy regulations, or everything all at the same time. Do you have a quick thought you can share on all how those dialectics are just part of what you do?
That's quite correct. Yes, we cover everything. I had an answer for the previous question that Celine was asked, which yes, we collect that kind of data, and we have it attached to the back of our dams when people are going to buy imagery. It all comes together with being able to provide a customer with a product from one of our museums that promotes the museum, raises a little bit of revenue, pushes the collection out for use so people can engage with regimental history. That's the key to everything there. With us and the dam, I manage that risk for what people don't know to the rules and regulations, and where we can meet somewhere in the middle.
And then when we hear from you next year in London and New York, where I know you'll be traveling, we'll look forward to hearing how the live operations have translated that theory into practice. And speaking of theory into practice, each of you have given us great perspective on a complex area and a changing area. Thank you for your time getting ready for this and for your participation here with us at Henry Stewart. Up next in track 1, please join Josh Van Dyke of SendShare and Chris Neiman of Msphere Plus to understand if your dam is working optimally and when to upgrade, and tips on where to start. or head over to track 2 and join Brian Vassoff of Extreme Reach to learn about a long and short-term storage strategies to support reuse while balancing the need for rapid access. And again, with a thanks to each of you, with our wishes for the best of luck in the important roles that you play in our community. Thank you, and this concludes this session.